Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're taking a closer look at a game that, on paper, might not have seemed that exciting.
The Georgia Bulldogs versus the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, classic rivalry, but Georgia was the heavy favorite.
Exactly right. I mean, another dominant season for the Bulldogs coming off that national championship. And Georgia Tech, well, they're still rebuilding.
That's where things get interesting. We dove into all the articles, reports, and the game footage itself, and let me tell you, this one was way closer than anyone expected.
Yeah, when you sent this game in, I was like, okay, another Georgia blowout. What's the big deal? But then I started reading, and I was like, wait a minute. There's more to this story.
Oh, there's definitely more to this story. Friday night game, Thanksgiving weekend, a little bit of overconfidence on Georgia's side, maybe. It's all there.
Okay, so let's break it down. First off, Friday night game, that's unusual, right? Especially,
Yeah, the first Friday night clash between these two teams since 1994. So you've got that kind of weird energy right off the bat. Friday night lights, high school vibes, but with these powerhouse college programs.
and you have to think, for a lot of these Georgia players, Friday night was when they shined back in high school. Maybe a little bit of nostalgia creeping in.
Maybe. But there's also the pressure. Georgia, they're sitting at 8-2 coming into this game, playoff hopes on the line. They need a win to stay in the top four.
And Georgia Tech, they're not just playing for pride here. They're 7-3. A new coach. This is a chance to make a statement, to show the college football world that they're back.
Huge opportunity for them. And you know those Georgia Tech fans, they travel well.
Well.
Even on Thanksgiving weekend, I bet they were loud in Sanford Stadium.
I'm sure they were fired up. Okay, so we've got this scene set,
Mhm.
a Friday night showdown, high stakes for both teams, and this intense rivalry. But before we get into the game itself, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, the injury report.
Right. Georgia, they're dealing with some key injuries, especially at running back. Their star, Trevor Etienne, is out, and there were questions about Dylan Bell and Anthony Evans.
And on the Georgia Tech side, it was all about the quarterback situation. Was Aaron Philo going to make his homecoming debut?
There were so many rumors swirling around, and it would have been an amazing story, right? Local kid comes back to lead his team against the defending national champs. But ultimately, they went with Haynes King, the transfer from Texas A&M.
Okay, so injuries, quarterback mysteries, all this pregame buzz. What about the coaches? Anything interesting there?
Kirby Smart, Georgia's coach, he had some interesting comments before the game. He called it a strap it on, strike somebody in the mouth kind of game.
Strap it on, strike somebody in the mouth.
Yeah.
Wow, okay, so he's definitely trying to fire up his team. But did it work? Because when I read about how the game started, Georgia looked anything but fired up.
Yeah, about that first half, it was rough. I mean, Georgia came out flat, mistakes, penalties, they just couldn't get anything going.
And Georgia Tech, they capitalized on every opportunity. They were playing with so much energy, so much intensity.
Their defensive coordinator had a brilliant game plan. They stacked the box, dared Georgia to pass, and it worked.
And remember, Georgia's run game was already weakened with Etienne out. So they're trying to pass, but they're also dealing with that wind.
Oh, yeah. The weather was definitely a factor. It was freezing, windy, and that made things tough for both teams, especially the quarterbacks.
But Georgia Tech's quarterback, Haynes King, he seemed to handle it pretty well, especially in that first half.
Yeah.
He made some big throws, kept the chains moving.
He did. And their defense, they were flying around, making plays, forcing turnovers. Georgia just looked completely out of sync.
So they go into halftime down 17-0. Can you imagine being a Georgia fan in that stadium? The
Yeah.
defending national champs getting shut out by their biggest rival.
Talk about a reality check. And you know Kirby Smart, he's not the kind of coach who lets his team get away with that.
I bet that locker room was not a fun place to be at halftime. So what happened in the second half? Did Georgia come out with more fire, or did Georgia Tech just keep rolling?
Georgia definitely showed some fight in the second half, but it wasn't easy. They were still making mistakes, still struggling to run the ball.
The articles mentioned that they got stuffed at the goal line again early in the third quarter. It's like they just couldn't get out of their own way.
They were pressing, trying to force things, and it wasn't working. But then, late in the third quarter, something changed.
Yeah, the momentum shifted. It felt like Georgia finally woke up.
There was this one play, a scramble by Bennett, their quarterback. He picked up like 20 yards on 3rd and long, and it just seemed to energize the whole team.
You could feel the crowd getting back into it. And on the next drive, Bennett connects with Oscar Delp for a touchdown. Suddenly, it's a 10-point game.
Hope for Georgia fans, right? But Georgia Tech, they didn't back down. They kept fighting, kept making plays.
The fourth quarter, it was back and forth, both teams trading punches. The tension was building with every snap.
You could cut the tension with a knife. And remember, this isn't a full crowd because of Thanksgiving travel, so those who were there, they were really into it.
It was been so loud in the stadium.
Hmm?
Okay, so the fourth quarter's winding down. Georgia's starting to look like the Georgia we all know, but Georgia Tech's still hanging in there. What happened next?
Well, Georgia managed to tie it up late in the fourth. It was a touchdown pass to Dominic Levitt. Great play call, perfect execution.
So we're going to overtime, and at this point, I'm on the edge of my seat. I mean, anything could happen, right?
Anything could happen, absolutely. And remember, the weather's still a factor. It's cold, it's windy.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, especially for kickers. That wind, that cold, it's got to mess with your timing.
Big time. And wouldn't you know it, the first thing that happens in overtime, Georgia Tech misses a field goal.
Yeah.
The kicker just slipped a little on that frozen turf.
Heartbreaking, right? I mean, you can't blame the kicker. Those conditions were brutal.
Nope. Tough break for Georgia Tech. And that miss gave Georgia a huge opportunity, a chance to win it right there.
And that's exactly what they did, right?
Yep. They marched down the field methodically, and Bennett punched it in for the game-winning touchdown.
Georgia wins, but man, that was close. Too close for comfort if you're a Georgia fan.
No doubt. They escaped with a 9-2 record. Their playoff hope's still alive, but they definitely showed some weaknesses in this game.
Yeah, they can't rely solely on their run game. They need to be more mentally tough, more disciplined when things aren't going their way.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, they showed resilience. They found a way to win even when they weren't playing their best.
And Georgia Tech, they proved they're a team to be reckoned with. A 7-4 season, that's a huge improvement.
Big time. And you can tell this new coach, he's got them believing they can compete with anyone. I'm excited to see what they do next year.
Me too. Okay, so we've talked about the game, the final score, the implications for both teams. But what about those details, the stuff that's not always in the headlines?
You mean the beyond the scoreboard stuff?
Exactly. Like we
Right.
talked about the weather, the smaller crowd because of Thanksgiving travel. But what about Kirby Smart's pre-game comments?
And-
That whole strap it on, strike somebody in the mouth thing. Did we actually see that play out on the field?
Well, you know, it's funny because in that first half, Georgia looked anything but ready to strap it on. They were hesitant, making mistakes. It was like they were playing scared.
Yeah, it was the opposite of what he was preaching.
Right. Right. But then in the second half, overtime especially, we saw that grit, that determination. They dug deep, they fought back, and they found a way to win.
So maybe they needed that wake-up call, that first half struggle to really flip the switch.
Maybe so. And you've got to give credit to the coaching staff. They made adjustments, got the guys refocused at halftime.
It's also interesting to think about the impact of a new coach on a program. Georgia Tech, they were kind of stuck in a rut for a while. But this new coach, he's brought a new energy, a new belief.
Yeah, sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective, a different way of doing things to unlock a team's potential. And that's what we're seeing with Georgia Tech.
It's like we witnessed the beginning of a new chapter for them, and it's exciting to see where they go from here.
But back to Georgia for a minute. This win, as ugly as it was, keeps their playoff hopes alive. What does this game tell us about their chances of repeating as national champions?
Well, it definitely exposed some weaknesses. They're not invincible. They can't just rely on talent alone. They need to be mentally tough. They need to execute better in those pressure situations.
But they also showed they can win ugly, right? They can grind it out, find a way to win even when they're not playing their best.
Exactly. And they still have one of the best defenses in the country, a quarterback who can make big plays. They're still a contender, but they have some work to do if they want to repeat.
So for our listeners out there, what's the one big takeaway from this deep dive into the Georgia Tech game?
I'd say it's this. Sometimes the most exciting games, the most revealing stories, they come from the unexpected. We came into this thinking it would be a boring blowout, but we got a rivalry game full of twists and turns, a nail-biting finish, and a glimpse into the future of both programs.
And it reminds us that in sports, just like in life, those little things matter. The day of the week, the weather, the crowd, a coach's pregame speech, it all adds up.
So pay attention to those details, those stories unfolding beneath the surface. That's where you find the real insights, the real excitement.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, everyone. We'll catch you next time for another journey into the fascinating world of sports.